lot happened in week 2 of the NFL, and honestly, a lot of wide receivers got hurt, and that's going to impact your fantasy teams. And I'm talking about big name wide receivers. So in this video, we are discussing 10 wide receivers that you could add right now, pick up on your fantasy team to help improve your team and, get to the playoffs, win a championship. And we'll start with the Chargers' second-year player, former first-round pick, and that's Quinton Johnson out of TCU, the man who just turned 23 years old. He had an interesting week 2, finally. Like in week 1, we saw some nice usage out of him. He had a big yards after the catch play, and in week 2, that continued. Because as you can see right here, Quinton Johnson put up not just 5 catches for 51 yards, found the end zone twice, had 6 targets. He had some big boy catches in this game, downfield, jump ball type stuff, and held onto those balls, which was a problem with him in his rookie year with drops. 22 fantasy points, a massive day. And look, the usage for him in week 2 was good. He ended up leading the team in snaps by far. He had 14 more snaps than any other receiver. He was staying on the field in those one wide receiver sets when the Chargers were running the ball heavily. He runs 19 routes the most on the team. His 6 targets are the most on the team. Over a 30% target share is good to see. So everything is kind of clicking, and indeed in this game he had a career high 32% target share. Now I do have to point out some things though, because in this game we had Josh Palmer coming into it banged up and injured, and that was kind of evident based on his usage. He might have been a little bit limited. DJ Chark is still out for a couple of more weeks. He'll be back potentially in 2 weeks off of IR. And then you have Lad McConkey, who I believe after week 1 when he led the team in target share and usage, I believe he's actually going to be the number 1 receiver on this team by the end of the year in terms of overall targets. So although this was a great game for Quinton Johnson, he's not the guy that you go out there and spend a massive amount, like 25+% of your budget on, because again, there's still some other guys in this wide receiver room, and this is a run first team. Let me remind you, this team ran 44 times. There you go, 2 4s, 44 times in week 2, and they only threw like 19 times. But there is no doubt about it that Johnson should be taking a step forward this year, so he should be picked up in most leagues. He's like available in 90+% of them. His own head coach has been saying stuff all off season. His new head coach now, Jim Harbaugh. Nobody I'm excited more than Quinton Johnson. He's kind of been picked on a lot by people, and I doesn't think it phases him, or I don't think it phases him. This is a guy that all off season, Jim Harbaugh was like giddy about Quinton Johnson being better. They said that he was misused last year, and he's going to be used better in this offense, and through 2 weeks, he actually has been. Now, if you're not familiar with Quinton Johnson, like we said, he was drafted last year. He's a big, kind of lengthy, unique style receiver, like a T. Higgins size, 6'3", about 208 pounds, and what he was known for in college was his burst. His ability to win downfield, sure, and his contested catches, that's where his catch radius comes in right here, 89th percentile, nearly top 10% of all time to attend the NFL Combine according to Player Profiler, that's this page, but his big thing was his burst. 97th percentile burst, which helps him get those jump balls, get off the line of scrimmage. These were the things that made him a first-round pick, along with his production in college last year, or 2 years ago, we could pull this up at TCU, where he broke out in his final year for over 1,000 yards, was averaging 17.8 yards per catch. In total in college, he was averaging 20 yards per catch, a downfield weapon, and a 21% target share. All these numbers are strong. And now it is just a 2-game sample, but last year, Johnson only caught 56% of his balls. A lot of those was because he was dropping the balls, but this year he's already caught 72%. So maybe there is a chance that Johnson, the former first-round pick, does take a step forward this year. The question just becomes, how much does that really matter? How often will the Chargers be throwing 30+ times a game, having the opportunity to have 6+ targets when you get a DJ Chark back, when you get a fully healthy Josh Palmer? Well, I guess if Quinton Johnson is going to be stepping forward, or at least breaking out a little bit in this second year, that none of those things might matter, because it's not like Chark and Josh Palmer are these elite wide receivers that are going to command 10 targets a game on their own. It's just whoever wants to take those targets can have them, and right now it's Quinton Johnson. And for what it's worth, right now Johnson ranks 37th in EPA, that's his wide receiver efficiency through 2 weeks, which is ahead of guys like, let me look at my list here, Garrett Wilson, Mike Evans, a ton of guys, Brandon Ayuk, Deebo Samuel, so he has been playing well. Now the next man I want to talk about, he's not a wide receiver, I get it, but he was basically used that way in week 2, and he's a pass-catching tight end, and that is Hunter Henry. And the reason why we have to talk about Hunter Henry, a couple of reasons. First off, his usage was fantastic in this game. Look at the bottom of the screen right here. He plays 57 snaps, the most on the team. He runs 28 routes, the most on the team. That's including the wide receivers here, and he sees 10 targets, which is not just the most on the team. It was a 57% target share, the second highest on the week in week 2, the highest I've ever seen for a tight end while I've been doing this the past 6 or 7 years. And that 57% target share, his 12 total targets is what that translated to, what led to 8 catches, 109 yards, over 20 fantasy points. He was the tight end 1 on the week. Now, full disclosure, I am recording this before Monday Night Football, so maybe you get a Dallas Goedert or a big Kyle Pitts game. Either way, you're going to have a top 3 performance and likely number 1 overall performance for Hunter Henry, who's available right now, and I believe 78% of fantasy leagues, which, for the tight end position so far this season hasn't been great. That's somebody who needs to be a priority at. And as you can see right here, according to Jacob Gibbs on Twitter, for the early week 2 games, this does not factor in the Sunday Night Football game, the Monday Night Football game, and a couple of those 4 p.m. games. So basically the majority of the games, though, 11 games, Hunter Henry was number 2 in target share, only behind Malik Neighbors, a crazy 67% on his 18 targets. Hunter Henry, 50% target share, depending on where you look, 57%. I believe it's 57% when you account for throwaways, which really aren't targets. 50% 50+% target share though for Hunter Henry, by far the most amongst tight ends, and he was the only tight end to top a 30% target share in week 2. Obviously great numbers. Now these numbers aren't going to stay consistent. You're not going to get him seeing that many targets a week, 10 plus at the tight end position, but Alex Van Pelt, the coach that we talked about for the running back waiver video, if you haven't watched that yet, go check it out. He's a guy who loves to run the ball. We've been seeing that right now at Ramondre Stevenson and Antonio Gibson, but also he likes to run the ball and uses tight ends. That's what he did during his time as the offensive coordinator for 3 seasons, the last 3 seasons with the Cleveland Browns, ran the ball with those running backs and used David Njoku, who had his breakout with Van Pelt, a lot. He was like the primary target in the offense most of the time. So again, Henry is available in 78% of fantasy leagues right now, and after being the number 1 tight end on the week, he's somebody that you should be putting a priority ad in for. That does not mean 20 to 25% of your budget. Save the most of your budget for those top end running backs that you need to get, like the Jordan Masons and J.K. Dobbins already this year, and even Zach Charbonnet, but Hunter Henry is a priority at tight end. Next up, I want to talk about the Rams wide receivers because, oh man, it's a wasteland out there and I'm concerned. Puka Nacua is going to miss probably at least the next 5 to 6 plus weeks. Cooper Kupp went down in this game, and at the end of the game afterwards, it was reported that he was seen in a walking boot. This is an ankle injury. He's dealt with many ankle injuries, which is not good. And if it's anywhere near a mid to high ankle sprain, Cooper Kupp's going to miss some time. Now, as of the time that I'm recording this right now, there is no timeline. There's not even he's day to day, he's week to week. Ideally, by the time this is out to you, you will know that. Maybe if it comes out by the time I'm editing this, I'll pop up that tweet on the screen so you know the update. But as of right now, it's looking like Cooper Kupp, if he's in a walking boot with an ankle injury and they're saying that it looks like a mid to high ankle sprain, all the Twitter doctors, that's probably him missing 2 weeks. Ideally, that's it, but maybe up to 4 plus weeks if it is a high ankle sprain. And that means that you're going to start to get some of these other wide receivers that I showed you taking on a larger role in the offense. And that would be Demarcus Robinson as the de facto number 1 receiver. Tyler Johnson, who's been operating as a number 3 receiver, bumps up into the wide receiver 2 range. You have guys like Tutu Atwell, who have been a part of this offense for years. You have Jordan Whittington, who was a Texas wide receiver taken in a late round, and he's somebody who had a nice camp. But overall, if I'm being honest with you, none of these wide receivers are that exciting if they're the number 1, because now they'll have to face number 1 cornerbacks. They'll be the priority of the defense, and they've never had to do that in their career because they're not standout players. If I had to prioritize one guy to pick up, it would be Demarcus Robinson, who, believe it or not, is still available in 60% of leagues. And like I've said on the running back video, you might be watching this saying, none of these guys are available in my leagues. Again, you play in leagues that are really serious. We'll get to some of those guys later in the video for deeper leagues, but for right now, he's available in over 60% of leagues. And this is a guy in Robinson who played 88% or ran 88% of the routes in week 2. That number only increased once Cooper Kupp left the field and Robinson was left on the field for basically all formations, but this only led to 12% of the targets. It's not like he's a target hog. He has never been a target hog in his career, but one thing that should be noted and is really a reminder is that during his final 5 games last year, Robinson was a top 12 fantasy receiver overall, and that was with Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua healthy, and now obviously those guys are likely out, or definitely out for Puka, maybe out for Kupp. Now, if I had to pick a second option to target, and again, I'm reluctantly doing so, I'd much rather pick up somebody else here, it would be the 26-year-old Tyler Johnson, who is now going to take on a bigger role in this offense after he was involved a little bit last week without Puka Nacua being out there. Had a big 50-yard play in week 1 once Puka Nacua went down. In week 2, he runs 78% of the routes, but he only sees 12% of the targets. And maybe more concerning is this right here. His ADOT, and this is on Fantasy Life, average depth of target through 2 games is just right now 6 yards. 6 yards on your average depth of target means you're only being targeted on average 6 yards downfield. That's not going to lead to explosive plays, big plays, and really not a lot of fantasy production. So I would rather Demarcus Robinson, and honestly, maybe a sneakier option would be a Tutu Atwell, who did see his role increase last week, who did see an average depth of target of over 14 yards. He's a downfield speedy receiver, and if there was somebody who's an even deeper league, and these are for your deep league guys, he's available in over 90%, closer to 99% of leagues right now, is the 6th round pick out of Texas, Jordan Whittington. But the problem with Jordan Whittington is, look, he's 6'1", he's 205 pounds, he's a nice big receiver, he has decent speed, but his issue is, when's he going to get into the offense? Well, we saw him in a limited role earlier last week. He really wasn't being used downfield. The downfield guys in this offense right now are Tutu Atwell, Demarcus Robinson. Can Whittington get on the field more? I'm a little skeptical. Now, before we get into a player who is coming back as soon as this week and potentially could be the number 1 wide receiver in his offense, and basically nobody wants to add him, I just want to show you the waiver wire tool from last week. These are the waiver wire tiers from last week. They were updated multiple times. This is just one small tool that you get in the fantasy blueprint this year, and that over 15,000 people got for week 1 and 2. And you can get it this week as well. If you want to win your fantasy league or have the best chance to get to your fantasy playoffs, this blueprint is for you. And to get your fantasy blueprint, all you do is come to this page and you follow these 2 simple steps. It'll take you through a couple of just steps that'll be, maybe 30 seconds to a minute, and you can get your fantasy blueprint. And the big thing is, it is risk-free. It's 100% risk-free. It's a one-time payment when you sign up through our steps through one of our partners. And if you don't make your fantasy playoffs, as I promise here, I'll just refund your deposit of $10, your one-time payment of $10. So again, you sign up through one of our partners, you give them $10 for the entire year, and if you don't make your fantasy playoffs, you get your $10 right back. So you either get into the playoffs for a chance at a championship run, which I will help you with, or you get your $10 back. This is risk-free. Now, that wide receiver who's going to most likely be returning this week and is maybe going to be the number one receiver on his team is Josh Downs of the Indianapolis Colts. And I know what you might be saying, oh, but Sal, Michael Pittman's on this team. Michael Pittman hasn't been playing well. We told you last week that he's a trade-away player because of the fact that he doesn't fit into this offense well. And in camp and the preseason, all the reports were, before Josh Downs got hurt, Josh Downs was the number one receiver on this team very quietly. It was kind of the sneaky thing that was going to happen in August and maybe make him a great fantasy pick until he got hurt. He was the number one receiver over Michael Pittman in camp. Despite all of that, right now, because he's hurt, which makes some sense, Downs is available in over 75% of fantasy leagues. As a little reminder, last year as a third-round pick, Josh Downs earned 98 targets. That's 5.8 targets per game, which for any rookie is very good. But keep in mind, this is a guy who only basically started like 9 games last year, played a couple of games a little bit banged up. So for a guy who started only 9 games and was a part-time player in the other games, pushing towards 100 targets, a reminder, last year Rashee Rice had 100 targets in his rookie year, is pretty dang good. And the reason why you should be adding him right now is because this past week, and we already told you should have added him last week, but this past week he was considered a true 50-50 to play in the week 2 game. He did not. Look, he practiced fully on Friday. So he's basically back from this high ankle sprain, something that could linger. He did not end up playing on Sunday, but he got the limited practice in on Thursday, full practice in on Friday. He's going to have another whole week of practice. I think he plays in week 3. Add him before that happens. And you should also look to add Jaylen Tolbert, and this is more so in your deeper leagues, but if you're in a 12-team league that has like 6-7 bench spots, he starts to come into play. Definitely your 14-team leagues, because what he did in week 2 was impressive. Jaylen Tolbert goes out there. He plays the most snaps on the team, 60, ahead of CeeDee Lamb. Of course, CeeDee Lamb's still the number one receiver on this team, but he runs the most routes and he sees the most targets with 8 targets. Overall, he had a very strong performance, and it wasn't just that, oh, okay, he was out there running routes. Okay, he got a couple of targets, Dak didn't know what to do. He had to throw the ball away. No, he was getting separation, and when he wasn't, he was making grown man catches. I mean, you could just look at this grown man catch right here. I'll let you watch the entire video of this. He comes back to the ball, catches the ball with basically like 1.5 hands. Jaylen Tolbert has adjusted to the NFL, and this is something that he said in his career coming out of a smaller school, I think it was South Alabama, that he had trouble entering the NFL coming from such a small program to the NFL in like a 1-year span. And look at that. Yes, it was South Alabama, and this is where he came. He came as a third-round pick. Maybe he wasn't ready for his first year. Then last year we started to see him come on a little bit more, and according to all the reports this camp and preseason, that yeah, he was starting to stand out and look like a guy who's definitely the wide receiver 3 on the team with a little bit of upside thanks to his youth. Now, currently on this team, we know CeeDee Lamb's the number 1 option. Most weeks will probably push towards a 30 to 40% target share, and Brandon Cooks is a nice veteran and the number 2 option, but Cooks is aging. He's 31 plus years old. In week 1, he had a nice day. I think he should be rostered in most fantasy leagues, but by the end of the year, I wouldn't be shocked if Cooks, who has suffered a lot of injuries, including head trauma and concussions, which is something that could be reoccurring, this is a guy that maybe isn't as durable towards the end of the year as the younger player Jaylen Tolbert. And if the upside is that you're the number 2 receiver in a Dak Prescott-led offense, well, I think that that's pretty appealing. I should also point out that Jake Ferguson, this is the injury report for last week. He still has this knee issue. He did not practice all week. Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, did not practice all week, ends up missing the game. So it's not a guarantee that Jake Ferguson returns in week 3 either. And if he's out, that's just even more target share, especially in the red zone for these wide receivers, which of course includes Jaylen Tolbert to benefit from. Now, the next player we have to go to, we have to first start with this right here, because Evan Ingram was inactive for week 2 after suffering a hamstring injury during the pregame warmups. This screwed me in one of my main leagues, the Flock Fantasy League, which you can check out a YouTube channel we have called the Flock League, which is kind of like, if you know the show The League from FX, we're kind of reenacting that. It's like a reality TV for fantasy. And this screwed me because I checked my lineups during the normal inactive times, and Evan Ingram himself was playing, so I kept him in there. And then 30 minutes later, he's a random late scratch, but I was at brunch and could not look at my phone. I was at a nice little brunch with my girlfriend and her family, which is beautiful people, beautiful times, beautiful food, but unfortunately, Evan Ingram got a nice little 0 in my lineup. But because he did not play, that allowed the second-year player and a second-round pick, surprisingly second-round pick last year. This kind of went under the radar from Penn State, Bretton Strange, to actually get into the lineup, and the 23-year-old looked really good. I mean, look at this right here. Bretton Strange runs 72% of the routes, sees a 25% target share, which led this team, which is highly impressive for a guy making his first ever NFL start and having less than an hour's notice that he was going to start and see a big role in this game. And what does he do? He catches 3 of 6 targets, 65 yards, a couple of explosive plays in there, 9.5 fantasy points, which doesn't sound like a lot, but it was enough to be a top 10 tight end on the week. That's the way the tight end position is going these days. And basically any tight end that's showing some promise, especially if they're young, dynamic, explosive, have a quality quarterback, they should be getting some attention like Bretton Strange. And this makes it even more important because Evan Ingram's hamstring, which he suffered on game day, usually like a 2 2-week recovery time at minimum for players. He's now considered week to week, which I think Brent Strange is going to start at least one, probably two, maybe even more games moving forward. So he's somebody you want to look at to add in your deeper leagues, or honestly, you could even pick him up and start him, especially if you had Evan Ingram or one of these other tight ends that got hurt recently, like a Jake Ferguson or a David Njoku. Speaking of David Njoku, let's go to his team where, yes, Jerry Jeudy is still available in over 50% of leagues, believe it or not. Now, I know for many of you who are in competitive leagues, he might not be out there, so I do have another option for you that we'll talk about while talking about Jeudy as well. But look, you can't deny that Judy's had a nice start to the season. In week 1, he gets 8 targets. Now he only has 3 catches for 21 or 25 yards, but he finds the end zone, which saves his day. But then in week 2, he continues it here. 6 targets, still a nice target share, 5 catches, 73 yards, and a couple of explosive plays on his way to over 12 fantasy points. So he's been a decent flex option to start the year. And the role's been pretty good for this guy. I mean, he's running 30 plus routes a game. We know that this team in Cleveland is going to throw more. They threw a lot last year. They're going to throw this year. And the nice thing for Jeudy is this right here, his ADOT, his average depth of target, which we talked about earlier, how often or how deep you're getting the ball downfield. Through 2 weeks right now, his ADOT is this number right here. 13 yards downfield is a very strong number. It leads to potential explosive plays. Now, so far through these 2 games, the wide receiver core and the target share, the percentage of targets that these guys are earning is pretty balanced. Like right here, you see Elijah Moore, Jerry Jeudy, and Amari Cooper. They're all between a 19% and 21% target share, basically earning the same amount of targets through 2 weeks so far. So it's pretty balanced. It's anybody's wide receiver room as of right now. Now, I believe we all think it's going to be Amari Cooper, but he's not available on wide receiver waivers right now. So what you do get is you get a guy in Jerry Jeudy, but you also get this other player right here who's also available right now in over 90% of leagues, and that's one Elijah Moore. Because Elijah Moore last week, he ends up seeing 8 targets tied for a team high. He puts up 10 fantasy points, so a nice flex option for you, turning those 8 targets into 6 catches for 44 yards. But the concern for Elijah Moore, I see a lot of people, like I said, hyping him up on Twitter right now and just in some spots, and I think he's a decent deep league ad, but 4.2 average depth of target. That ADOT of 4.2 yards is atrocious. It's really hard to make some explosive plays, and when you have guys like Amari Cooper winning downfield, so far Jerry Jeudy winning downfield with success, I don't think we're going to get Elijah Moore downfield, which means like even if he sees 6, 7, 8 targets, it's not going to lead to a ton of big plays, and then when he doesn't see those targets, it's going to lead to bomb weeks. So he's somebody who's like only a deep league ad, and another guy who as of right now is an ad in a lot of leagues is Johan Dawson. And again, I'm recording this before the Monday Night Football game. That's the way content works. We have to record these videos to get them out the next morning, send it over to some people to edit, right? So I'm recording it before that. So if something happens to Johan Dawson, like he gets hurt, obviously don't play him. If something happens that like maybe Johnny Wilson, the 6th round rookie, looks more appealing, the bigger wide receiver, well then just take the same analysis and put it over to Johnny Wilson. But the reason why is AJ Brown is ruled out for Monday Night Football tonight. He's probably not going to play in week 3 is my guess, because he suffered a midweek hamstring injury. So he's going to probably be out week 2 for sure, maybe and most likely week 3, and then who knows after that depending on the severity. And I'm just really wanting to get a piece of this Eagles offense as much as I can. They all are pretty expensive, if you will, if you tried to trade for a Jalen Hurts, a Saquon, and an AJ Brown or a Devonta. So maybe led by Kellen Moore, the offense looks great so far through 1 game. We'll see what happens on Monday Night Football. This is a guy that I believe in, a coach in Kellen Moore. We saw connect week 1, the way that they were being creative, putting Devonta Smith in the slot, putting their receivers in the best places to win. So if it's Johan Dawson, if it's Johnny Wilson, whoever it is filling in for AJ Brown tonight, that's the guy that I want to add as a week maybe 3, maybe 4 filler if Brown misses. Now, before we get into a guy who's scored in both of his games so far, but is currently available in checks notes, 95% of leagues, almost 65% of you are not subscribed to this channel. So here's just your reminder to do so. If you find these videos helpful, the gentleman's agreement right there as we shake hands is to hit the subscribe button, as it helps this channel reach more people. So if you find it helpful, hit that subscribe button, gentleman's agreement. And that guy who scored in both weeks and is available in over 95% of leagues right now is Jaylen Naylor, who might have a bigger role moving forward, because as of right now, Jordan Addison is still battling injury, as we show you right here. His ankle injury kept him out. If we look at the injury report from this past week, Monday, Thursday, Friday, these DNPs did not participate, did not practice, whatever you want to call it. He did not play. And also Justin Jefferson got hurt in this game. He left early with officially, it was a leg. Some people called it a quad. So officially, I guess it's a quad injury, but he's considered day-to-day. He said he'll be fine. But we also got news last week that Kenneth Walker was day-to-day and he was going to be fine. Then he didn't practice all week. So we'll have to check the practice reports this week on Justin Jefferson. But Naylor was more involved this week. He was dealing with his own injury entering week 1. And then in this past week, he ends up leading the team in snaps, routes run. He sees 4 targets, and on those 4 targets, he produced yet again. He scored a touchdown last week on limited snaps. This past week, 3 catches, 54 yards, a couple of explosive plays in there, another touchdown in a tough matchup against the 49ers, puts up over 14 fantasy points, something to keep your eye on, especially in deeper leagues. And it's worth noting that through 2 games, I thought week 1 was not really telling because it was an easy matchup against the Giants, but week 2 against the 49ers, Sam Darnold looks really good. Not only is he doing everything that Kevin O'Connell and the Vikings are asking of him, but he's also able to create on his own when needed, and that's what leads leads to those off-script explosive plays like we saw for Jaylen Naylor in week 2. Now, next up, I want to talk about some quick hitters. The first one will be Dontavian Wicks. Now, he scored this past week. The Packers only threw 14 times with Malik Willis, but Jordan Love should be back soon. I like Dontavian Wicks this whole year, especially in deeper leagues at this point. Another name to mention is Tim Patrick. No, he's not on the Denver Broncos anymore. The nearly 31-year-old wide receiver, former Bronco, is now on the Detroit Lions, and the reason why he's appealing is because Amon-Ra St. Brown got hurt this past week. Now, Adam Schefter is reporting that St. Brown should be fine, only having a contusion, which is a bruise and cramping, so it should be fine. Some Twitter doctors thought that he might miss 2 to 4 weeks, might be some sort of ankle sprain or something like that, or maybe a knee sprain. They just really couldn't tell from the video. So assuming that he's fine, then you don't really have to pick up Tim Patrick, but check the practice reports this week, making sure Amon-Ra is practicing. Another guy to talk about is going to be the rookie, Jaylen Pul, who they said that he was going to get more usage in week 2, and he ended up getting more usage in week 2. He goes out there, he runs more routes, 69% of them. He sees more targets, 14% of the targets compared to just 5% in week 1, and he ends up turning this into a decent performance. Let's find his performance. We found it. It was hiding on me a little bit there, but he has 2 catches for 12 yards. Okay, like that's nothing crazy, but all 3 of his targets were in the red zone. He turned one of those red zone targets into a touchdown, and this is a guy who's making his second ever NFL start on a wide receiver room that does not really have much guys there. Like if we show you the other wide receivers in this room according to Fantasy Life, I mean the guys who are out there, Demario Douglas, KJ Osborne, these are guys that are not threats. Tyquan Thornton, they're not like solid starters, let alone wide receiver ones. Maybe Polk continues to see more usage and it only increases from here. Somebody who should be on your radar. I think Mike Gesicki should also be on your radar, but don't go crazy about Mike Gesicki. Now he did have a really nice game, and again the tight end position is weak. He caught 7 of his 9 targets, 91 yards, was dominant in the middle of the field, had some downfield usage for Joe Burrow in this game, 16 fantasy points. Like on paper, this looks like an insane game, but he was not playing a ton of snaps. He only played about 50% of the snaps and routes in this game, and if that's going to keep up, it's going to be tough for him to have these consistent performances. Now, that doesn't mean he can't see more snaps, but he's not known to be a guy who blocks. Like that's the downfall of Mike Gesicki. That's why he didn't see a big role with the Patriots. You saw less time with the Dolphins as his career went on. He can't block. So if he can't block, well, you're probably not going to stay on the field a lot. As of right now, the Bengals are using sometimes 4 and usually 3 tight ends on the field, so that hurts your upside if you're Gesicki. I prefer some of the other tight ends we talked about earlier over him. So these are the wide receivers that you should be adding right now. But if you want to see the running backs, which is the most important position, especially on the waiver wire, where you should be spending most of your budget is the running back position, well, you can check out this video right here. And as I always say, that video might be your favorite video of all time, so you might as well check it out. And while you're there or you're here, hit that subscribe button as well, and I'll see you in the next one.